Nic McKinley.
Mike.
Have you seen the article on you where it's like this is basically the modern day Jack Ryan?
Yes, that's a funny backstory. That is a funny backstory.
First off, I'm jealous because I have no article like that. You know, they wrote an article. This guy was like an average, mediocre SEAL who pretty much rode the coattails of other guys. I mean, that's a impressive article. I mean, it makes you sound like you walk on water.
Yeah, that's their job. It was funny. So Vice reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're doing this Jack Ryan series." Mm-hmm. I'm not a big TV guy. Mm-hmm. I was familiar, but I'd never actually seen any of the Jack Ryan stuff, and so they sent me clips of the TV show, and I watched it, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's not me." Like, well, we understand that. We want to interview a field operative, and we want to interview an analyst. However, we understand you have a little bit of a background in both, mm-hmm. And Jack Ryan had a military background, and you've got a military background. So will you please do this? And at first, I was absolutely not. Like, I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
We are quiet professionals, and it was two mentors of mine, completely different people. One, Greg Jackson, Jackson Wink MMA, and the other is Colonel Jones, his former XO CAG. He's kept me from making really dumb decisions a lot. And he said, "Nick, quiet professional doesn't mean silent professional."
I knew you were going there. That is one of the greatest phrases.
Yeah, he said, there will be a narrative, and
control it.
The only question is, will you contribute to it? And if you don't contribute to it, you have no right to complain about it. And I was like, okay, well, and then I talked to Greg about it, and I said, "Hey, Greg, you have to do a lot of media. I don't know anything about media. What do I do here?" And he said, "Nick, you not taking advantage of these opportunities is hurting your cause." I was like, oh, man, there's two people now who are telling me that I need to do this. So I called Vice back and said, "All right, fine, I'll do it, but I want at least half of whatever you're doing to cover the work that we're doing in the fight against child trafficking. And human trafficking writ large." And they said, "No problem. We'd love to cover that too." And so that's kind of how the whole thing happened. And I was at a summer semester at grad school, right? So I'm in Boston, and I remember I was taking taking classes, and as I'm like walking from building to building across Harvard Yard, I'm like on the phone with Vice Media, like, "Hey, I got to go to an economics class, but I'll get back to you as soon as I can with an answer to your question." And it was
Vice just went down too, right?
Vice Media,
I think they went, or they declared bankruptcy.
Yeah, I don't know if they did. I know
they'll
heard
get
they were
bought out.
going to, but yeah,
somebody will come in and
that's
swoop them in.
Kind of what happened.
It's funny. This is what I love about podcasting is like you go off on these tangents, but I just spent 2 days Fox News in Newsmax, and every time I do that, like I go through this depression because it's these like societal norms from our communities of the quiet professional.
Right.
But again, it's been a lot of mentors who are like, "Mike, go represent the community well. Don't show your ass." And they one said, "Why'd you join the military?" "Well, I read all these books and I saw all these movies, and then I met a real Force Recon Marine." I'm like, "No way, they're true." We joined because Hollywood is one of the most powerful just recruiting tools the military has, especially special operations. You go watch Black Hawk Down, which was much prior or after we had joined, but you can't help but walk away being like, "Bro, I want to be a Ranger or CAG or a PJ
I mean, at the end of the day, we're men and we want to do cool stuff. That's ultimately what it comes down to. Now, if your cool stuff can also have a purpose behind it, then you're pursuing a righteous mission. Like what bigger calling is there than that? So, I mean, I got, people say, "Thank you for your service." And I don't get into the conversation, but I routinely want to say, "No, thank you for paying your taxes and allowing me to do that stuff."
I said the same things. I'm like, I've got about $100,000 worth of mountaineering gear and cold weather clothing sitting in my garage. So thank you.
Yeah, and hundreds of skydives and thousands of hours in really cool aircraft, and like this is, I mean, people would kill to do this, and I see this predominantly in men. I engage in the venture capital community with some of my other businesses, engage in these communities with these extremely wealthy people who never did anything like that when they were younger. And they a lot of them regret it. Not all, but a lot of them regret it and wish they had done something like that. And so I realized that even though I financially, right, and I'll catch up, but even though I financially didn't take advantage of the comfortable situations that I could have, I mean, I turned down an appointment to the Air Force Academy. Nobody does that. My team chief said I was the dumbest guy he'd ever met, which is still true. But that was to do the cool stuff that I wanted to do and pursue this extremely righteous mission. And anybody who says post September 11th, I can see where people will say like, "Oh, I joined out of patriotism." But if I'm completely honest, I mean, did I love the country? Sure. The Boy Scouts and becoming an Eagle Scout taught me a lot about patriotism and the things that I was supposed to do. But I didn't join the military because of patriotism. I joined the military because I wanted to do cool stuff. That's what happened.
What year did you come in?
1996.
1990. So I was 98.
Yeah. So I graduated high school. Did not go straight to college. Not a popular decision around the kitchen table, even though my parents were still very supportive, and none of this would have happened without them. And enlisted. And I didn't want to be an officer because then I had to be a combat controller. And I didn't want to be a combat controller. I wanted to be a pararescueman, and pararescue did not have officers at the time. So that was, it became a pretty binary decision for me.
Coming in prior to 9/11, I agree. Like, again, I just wanted to do cool things. I wanted to jump out of airplanes. I wanted to dive. I wanted the camaraderie, having done high school sports, and I didn't find that. So I did do one semester at University of Colorado Boulder, which was beautiful, but I spent most of my time skiing.
As you should.
With the Gold Pass. I don't know if they call it the Gold Pass anymore, but I had to withdraw from all my classes and enlist in the Marine Corps before my dad could get his hands on my neck. But when it took me until 2005 to actually get to a combat zone because the Marine Corps sent me back to school.
Right.
Prior to 9/11, and then we weren't part of SOCOM, which if you ever heard the story,
that's right.
The Marine Corps the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Al Gray, tough man, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, said all Marines are
special. Ops. Yeah.
And probably the biggest mistake, bravado, pride, drove that decision, and the Marine Corps lost out on a lot of time. They could have been in SOCOM. MARSOC could have been leap years ahead. Not that they'll catch up. It's the Marine Corps. Improvise, adapt, overcome. But I weighed the decision because I'm talking to all my Force Recon buddies who are either going PJ.
I was going to say, I'm grateful for the Commandant of the Marine Corps making that statement because pararescue benefited considerably. I mean, I think like probably a third of pararescuemen in my time were either battalion or Force Recon Marines who were, guys like John Kingsley, right? I mean, these guys were freaking legends. And I've got them in selection with me. And Dave Schumann.
Yes.
Dave Schumann just crushed our selection. And I'm like, wow, check these guys out. They've actually done some stuff. What was cool about pararescue, though, is that we were going to combat zones in the 90s. The very first time I ever received enemy fire was in 1998, in southern Iraq.
No kidding.
So, we had a SEAL team there with us. But Operation Northern Watch, Operation Southern Watch, was it Operation Olive Branch, Operation Desert Fox, like all of those, PJs were like ingrained in all of them. Pre 9/11, there was a time when I deployed over 300 days. Now that was because I volunteered for about everything smoking going
As
overseas.
You should. Yeah, that's how you form your reputation.
Yeah, and I just wanted to get in the mix. I wanted to do my job. And I was at Moody Air Force Base in Valdosta, Georgia. Not a lot of civilian rescues going on there. A couple of things off the coast, but it's not exactly like it was the Alaska team. So I wanted to be downrange as much as possible. And I actually deployed more pre 9/11 than I did after that, because in 2002 I got tapped and told that I would go be a instructor at the PJ school. Yeah. So I kind of had to
you
go
send
do
your
that.
best. You got to represent. You got to be I always believe the instructors, and I wrote about it in the book, you have to send your best to represent the community to the young kids that are trying to get in, give them the role model to emulate. But I remember when we got to the recon community, it seemed like at first recon battalion, all the guys wanted to, there was a few of us that wanted to go SEALs. Some guys wanted to go PJs. It was like you got there, you realized that there was no funding. and there was a poster. I can't remember if it was a PJ or a combat rescueman, or I'm sorry, CCT, but it had all the gear around them.
Oh yeah,
like, and even
the recruiting brochures.
Yeah, and we're like, we actually hated you guys. We're like, how do they? That's the individual loadout per operator. We're like, how is that possible?
So I have a funny story. Gentex helmets, right?
Yep.
Those are what, $1,000, something like that, right? I mean, expensive flight helmets, and that's what PJs are wearing for our Halo jumps. Not the best looking thing, but boy, are they comfortable. And the Air Force, after a period of time, will actually say that the helmet is too degraded for you to use anymore. Well, you know how hard it is to break in a Gentex helmet. So I took the shell of my new Gentex helmet. I took all the pads out of my old one, right? Put them in the new shell, and I threw the old shell away. And we were jumping with some Force Recon guys out of the I think it's a reserve unit in New Mexico.
Yes.
Right. And those guys had nothing, right? So I see this Marine walk by the trash can in our flight area, and he looks in there and he grabs the helmet, and it's all beat up, right? And he grabs it and he takes it and puts it in his truck. And I'm like, oh, okay, he's gonna like give it to his kid or something like that, right? Well, a couple of weeks later, they were coming to jump with us, and they jumped with us all the time because they didn't have the budget to pay the Air Force for the aircraft fuel to go get their Halo jumps. We're like, yeah, you guys come along with us, right? So and they were good dudes to hang out with, and they were some cool guys. The guy shows up to jump with my old Gentex, the shell of my old Gentex, and he took a bunch of ProTech helmet pads and had them all glued up in there and had this thing all jerry-rigged. And I was like, man, it's a different world over there, isn't it?
Well, I remember even at SEAL Team 3, you've got the dermo bins in the locker rooms, and it's like Christmas to a Marine.
Oh, yeah.
And like I just couldn't, like I would rummage through, even though I had all the brand new stuff, I would rummage through and take it. And I would still have friends at First Recon Battalion. I would just drive down and just drop kit bags, and you could not, those guys were more appreciative than anyone.
Oh, yeah.
That's the Marine Corps, man. Sometimes there's you got to love certain things about the Marine Corps and how they drive business. But there's certain things that are like, well, it's tradition. Well, tradition is no longer relevant, and there's better ways to do business. Yeah, outfit your people correctly, and you get a higher level of performance. This sort of do more with less, that only goes so far, and you can only tell me that so many times. That's what I love the Marine Corps, but ultimately, as the war kicked off, talking to all the Force buddies and the Recon guys, they're like, bro, we are sitting doing, just subpar tasks well below our level,
right?
While the Green Berets, the SEALs, the AFSOC guys are out there at the Vanguard. And that was, for me, I just gotten back from reading OCS. I took honorman and went to my colonel. I'm like, hey, I want to put an inter-service transfer. You should have heard it. You fucking traitor.
Oh, I got called that when I moved to the CIA.
No kidding.
Yeah.
There was a great major at the time. He was a Mustang. 15 kids. God bless his heart. Good American. He actually had a 15-pack van, was the family vehicle.
Oh, dang.
Oh, that he bought from government sales.
On a major salary.
Yeah. And
that's an efficient man with finance.
He is. He was a good man. And before we stepped in, he's like, hey, just take your lumps. And he's like, I got you. But no, proud of the Marine Corps. I didn't work with PJs and CCTs because we didn't work with them at the Whiteside SEAL teams until I got to JSOC. And I could not be more impressed with the dudes out of the 2-4, both from the PJs and the CCTs. It was just like they knew their duties. In terms of technical recovery, I know 18 Deltas medics are pretty.
Oh yeah, they're super squared away.
Super squared away. But in terms of the technical recovery, like 18 Deltas was just like, get out of the way, let the PJs do their thing.
Yeah, and I really, we've got this inter-service rivalry, right? But I think some people take that too far. It's what it's this mindset that there can only be one person. So you'll talk and you'll see these conversations, especially online within the Brovet community, right? And there ain't no drama like Brovet drama. And these guys will be like, oh, well, were you on this? Were you on Operation, Fortunate Child? And they're like, yes. Well, were you on the target? Yes. well, were you on the black side? No, I was on the red side. And you're like, oh, well, all the action was happening on the black side, right? And it's like everybody's always trying to one up each other. And I think the reality is that anybody who went through a water-based selection would have probably made it through any other water-based selection.
Yes.
Anybody who went through any of the land-based selections probably would have made it through any other land-based selection. The water is a equalizer, and it is a difference. However, that does not make one better than the other. And one of the cool things about being a PJ is I got to work with everybody.
Yes.
I mean, part of the reason why I got attracted to the CIA was because there was these agency dudes that we were working with post 9/11 in northern Iraq. Yes, there was a task force in northern Iraq right after 9/11. I got to be on that. And we were like, who are these dudes? Right? They had all the cool kit, they had all the cool stuff, and you know how it is. You're always looking for always looking for the red door of competence.
Yes.
Like where is Jason Bourne? He's got to be around here somewhere. And so, but that was because as agency, I was working with a JSOC element and some agency guys. Mm-hmm. But worked with SEAL teams, worked with MARSOC. Actually worked with MARSOC during, I guess Force Recon during Operation Desert Fox. Stellar dudes. And one of the things that in pararescue, we were light on infantry skills. And that was something that the former Marines really brought to the PJ teams. Because back then, and I think this has changed a little bit, but back then there was no dedicated PJ mission unless it was a personnel recovery specific mission. Mm-hmm. If it was any type of direct action, any type of operation, you were an attachment, and in some ways that made life a little bit difficult because you were the chair force guy. So it didn't matter how fast you were, how good of a shooter you were, how good you were at anything. You were the chair force guy, and you had to prove yourself. And right about the time the team was like, "Hey, you're Air Force, you're all right. You're doing pretty good." You were out the door, into a training cycle, back out to another team. Lather, rinse, repeat. You got to do the whole thing all over again. And that was tiring in some ways, but also really good because it meant that you had to stay on your game. You had to. You had no option to kind of get lazy and just go with the flow. Now, I think that changed a little bit with what the 2-4 was doing with JSOC, where it was more like you kind of
relationship based.
And you were kind of a dedicated blue asset or a dedicated green asset for a period of time. And I think that's really smart the way that they were the way that they kind of re-engineered that and did that after the war.
You took the words out of my mouth, and it's probably you guys during the early days of the war that laid the foundation, because when guys would come in, it was a very quick butt sniffing.
A revolving door.
They were one of the boys pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
Now, I say that on the blue side. I remember, I did tour over the green side, Fortunate Exchange Program, where I just deployed with some of the PJs, and the green side had a different view on the PJs because they had their internal medics.
Right.
And both great programs, but you guys always had to have a level of maturity, not to rush that process and just sort of let your actions speak for themselves and let the credibility build. But the guys were rapidly integrated when I got there.
Yeah, and look at some of the people that's produced. I mean, look at like Colon Lopez we were talking about earlier. Like that guy is a force of nature.
Yeah.
And
I can't wait to watch what he does when he retires here in October.
I'm a little afraid of what he might do. I mean, we're talking like, he's on a route to world domination.
He's what?
He's going to do amazing things. Make the community extremely proud.
People fall in love with tall, dark, and handsome. He like pretty much hits every category. Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico's like holding him up on a pedestal as sort of like the prototypical child. He's going to be in front of a lot of companies talking about leadership.
Yeah, he was, and what a great person to do it. He was my team chief at the PJ school, and to say that when they brought him in, which is probably one of the smarter decisions the Air Force made, was to bring him in. When they brought him in, and he was just an E7 at the time, he played the political game extremely well, and he made incredibly positive changes to that place, and it was very clear that he was going to be a force for good, because the PJ school was having, to put it lightly, some significant leadership challenges. And Ray single-handedly changed that place for the better. It was an extremely toxic environment during kind of the last few years that I was there. And Ray came in, and it just from day one, he started making changes, and everything just started getting positive and getting better. But you couldn't tell it was him doing it, which is how you know a true master of an art.
His maturity was probably leap years ahead of his peers,
decades ahead,
which is required when we talk about politics, man. Our community, screw the politics, and it's just politics. Dumb. I mean, this is a whole subset of it. I've got a buddy who's getting a PhD in organizational politics. It's part of every organization. You said it earlier prior to us hitting record, is that politics are a part of every organization. You have to play the game, or die in the vine, or be a product of whatever decision comes down. But
well, I'm a little embarrassed to say that as a young enlisted guy, I had I don't do the politics. I'm just here for the mission. It was a really stupid mindset that I had.
That's also, I'm sure that's also some of the mentors you had. Even if it was the E5s above you or the E6s,
absolutely
trying to play the tough guy, and it sort of filters down. You're like, oh, that's the way I need to approach this.
Yeah, and I look at some of those E6s and E7s that I had above me, and I'm like, man, some of them actually weren't near as impressive as I thought that they were, and some of them were a lot lower key, a lot less bravado, but they got a lot more done. And your metric changes. And when I got to the agency, I decided kind of at the end of my Air Force career, right? Pararescue, you're only really going to work if something goes wrong. And let's face it, you might be a shooter with another team of shooters. You might even be, in the element, but you're not really a focus until things go wrong, right? And then it's all eyes are on you. Okay, now it's your mission. But if nothing's going wrong, you're just one of the guys. And so for the pararescue community, I think that, and again, I think that's changed, but understanding that it's not about you at all until it is. And you have to be able to flip that switch, take command of the situation. You have some of the best operators in the world are now looking to you to solve the problem. You solve the problem, and then you release it back to them because it's no longer about you, right? Where I think a lot of the other soft community, you're a sniper, you are the mission. All support elements are to help you get into position to do the thing that you're supposed to do, right? You're an assault force. All elements exist to help you accomplish that mission. And it's only when something goes wrong in the house, right? When something goes wrong on the side of the ship that you actually become relevant to that mission. And how many times is it that nothing went wrong? That's extremely humbling to know that you were completely replaceable and irrelevant to that very specific mission. But the few times when you are relevant, you see things come together and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that person gets to go home to their wife and kids. I was on a road trip with my wife, and we were in southern Colorado, the New Mexico border. There's this truck stop there, right? I think it's like right on the New Mexico side. It's like the last place to get gas, right before you go over that Raton Pass. And my wife and I were going to Vail, I think. And so we stop, we get gas, we're inside getting some, Licky Chewies and Red Bulls, and this guy taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around, and it's a dude that I had saved from a helicopter crash. And he came up, give me this huge, like, Iowa corn-fed farm boy, gives me this huge hug and gets kind of teared up. And and I was like, oh, this is my wife. And he looked at my wife. He said, this man saved my life. He's like, my wife and kids get to have a dad because of your husband. And I was just like, now you're gonna make me choke up, man. Like that. And that's when you realize how important all those times of just sitting around bored out of your mind, and you were using that time to get better at your craft, how important that was.
The 99% for the 1%.
Right.
99% training for the 1%,
right.
Putting it to use. First off, if somebody came up and said that in front of my wife, I would, pop it into my head. I know my wife would be looking at me differently, and I know we're going to have a good night. Not to be crude, I know we've got ladies in the room. As
never
you get married, you look for ways to spice it up a little bit.
Never underestimate my ability to screw something up.
Yes. Then something comes out of my mouth, and it's like she's like, when you're on top,
you had 1 point, and now you're -10.
You bring up a point. I think it's a rule for life. It is never about you. It's not about you. And the second you realize that, it starts to drive things differently. It goes to the old Reagan quote. It's amazing what we can accomplish when nobody cares about the credit.
Right.
And when you know it's not about you and you understand that you are easily replaceable, then you just try to drive impact around your immediate circle. And that will cement a legacy in itself. But, to our earlier conversation, I just got to interview Johnny Joey Jones. You've seen him on Fox News. Big guy, handsome dude, Marine, had EOD tech, lost both his legs, articulate as hell, and just a total product and good representation in the Marine Corps. But, we were talking after we were recording. He's like, man, I struggle with modesty and humility. And I know where he was going with this. He's like, am I modest? No, I'm on TV, just like you and I are in the public light. He's like, I can't say I'm modest. I work out because I know what it takes to fill out my T-shirt. Humble? I hope so. I hope so. And I know I struggle with that a little bit as we get more into the limelight. I mean, what you do, I know you didn't do this to get in the limelight and to be on TV, but the more the Deliver Fund grows, you're going to have to be in the spotlight.
Absolutely. So you really, when you think about leadership as an example, you need to think about what is the leader's job. There's lots of philosophical pontification about leadership, and this is what you should do, and you should be a servant leader, and it's all very soft. At the end of the day, what is your job? What is your job as a warrior? What is your job as a leader? Your job is
which are not mutually exclusive.
Not mutually exclusive at all. Your job is as a warrior, is to create other warriors. Your job as a leader is to create other leaders. And so I'm extremely fortunate with Deliver Fund that, yes, I'm the point man. Yes, I'm the founder. I'm the idea guy. But I'm becoming increasingly irrelevant to the organization. And I actually didn't do any media at all for 5 years. I didn't run any of my own social media. I didn't do anything and I did that to the detriment of the mission. So I think oftentimes we need to step back, especially as SOF operators, and look at the bigger picture and say, I may not necessarily like the media stuff, but that's what my team needs me to do. Therefore, that's what I do.
No different than politics.
No different than politics.
You either do it or you're doing a disservice to your organization. And you probably weren't doing media mainly for 5 years because you were heads down laying the foundation for the roots of the company to grow.
Part of it was that. Yeah. Part of it was I just didn't want to do that. I that's not my personality. I'm not somebody who really liked that. I spent a couple of years, there was about a 2-year period between pararescue and the CIA where I was in the clearance process, and it's a process. And I was actually working. I started in a private personnel recovery startup, and then I did some Hollywood stuff, and worked for an A-list actor, one of the biggest names in Hollywood. Still a close personal friend. But him and a director, very well-known director, were like, man, this was awesome. Loved working with you. We're going to change your life. You're going to go be a big Hollywood guy. I was like, nope, I sure am not. And so I'm in the Screen Actors Guild, and I don't care. I don't do anything with that. But I did it to the detriment to the organization. So Deliver Fund would be 3 to 5 times as big now if I had not actually done if I had done the media stuff up front. And I think when it comes to humility, I think, in your book, you explain how you have to have competence in order to have humility. Yeah. If you try to say you're humble, but you don't have any competence, you're just weak. That's what that is. That is humble. One of the best, I think, analogies for humility, and I think this is something that we need to understand as SOF operators, comes from the original biblical Greek word for meek. We associate in English the word meek for weak.
Yes.
But the original word is praus or praus, and it actually means power under control, right? And I've heard another translation, and I don't know if it's right or not. I'm sure somebody in the comments will definitely correct us.
Yeah.
But another translation I've heard is that he who has a sword and knows how to use it, but leaves it in its sheath. And so that to me is the real humility. And so let me posit this. When I really did some self-reflection, I realized that part of the reason that I didn't do the media stuff in the beginning and I didn't take advantage of social media and all that was actually out of arrogance, because I don't have to do that. I shouldn't have to do that because I don't want to do that. Therefore, I shouldn't have to do that. But that's what my team needed me to do.
There's a lot of things I shouldn't have to do.
Right. So as the CEO, founder of Deliver Fund, I'm actually becoming more and more of really our chief evangelist.
Public face. Yeah.
Yeah. And the team, I mean, I could get hit by a bus tomorrow and this place will probably run a little smoother. so the team's really got the ball at this point.
Yeah. I feel that same way though. And part of it, going back to what you talked, so I call this the legacy of leadership. And Rich Diviney, who wrote the book Attributes, he was also a JSOC officer, calls it the irony of leadership, is that eventually you have to work your way out of a job.
Right.
So when I talk to companies, I often talk about the legacy of leadership. And I said, hey, first off, don't get us wrong. Your job as a leader is to drive results. That's number one.
100%.
And anyone who says we're not in the profession of performance or objective measures is 100% wrong.
Right.
And there's a lot of soft, touchy-feely
then how do you know if your leadership is actually working?
But what the biggest missed sort of understanding of a leader is, you better create the next generation of leaders. Sort of what Chris Fussell, who was McChrystal's foremost mentee. You probably know Chris.
I don't know him, but I know of him. I've read
He penned Team of Teams, and then he wrote One Mission. He calls it the art or the Zen of leadership is when it's basically an unbroken chain of generational leadership.
Yeah.
And that's what McChrystal did, is he trained teams so well he was no longer needed. And that they went on to train their junior enlisted or senior enlisted, their officers, to the point where it doesn't matter if McChrystal leaves the organization, the things are going to keep on moving.
Yeah. When I was at the CIA, running a team of all former SOF guys, I mean, every single person on my team had more experience than I did.
Story of my life.
Was farther, smarter, faster, and stronger. And so but the system is so broke, so everybody understands that I'm the guy they put in charge. Youngest country team leader. I can't say the country, but let's just say it was a nuclear-armed Islamic country of presidential importance. So I found myself on VTCs with the president on the other side.
Argentina. Horrible place. Horrible.
All the time, and so here I'm briefing the National Security Council, and I'm the guy who's supposed to make decisions. And I realized quickly that I was out of my depth, and I had to have because we were doing a lot of JSOC's work, we were doing our work, we were doing other intelligence agency work. We were really the only action element on the ground, and so we were tired. Is really what it kind of came down to. And you know how it is. You end up with the guys on your team that you really like and the guys on your team that you don't particularly care for. And are they competent? Are they not? Right? Where are your emotions getting involved? And so I came up with essentially an algorithm of 4 things. I'm a big math guy, right?
Yeah,
so I came up with an algorithm of four decision points that I would use to filter my leadership decisions, because these were no-fail missions. I mean, the kind of things that when they go wrong, it hits the news and people lose their jobs. And I'm literally the lowest-ranking guy at that table. So guess who's going to be the first head on the chopping block? It's this guy.
First off, the no-fail mantra.
Which it's no-fail.
It is like the biggest oxymoron there is.
Yeah,
I mean, given the history. You look at JSOC's. Well, it wasn't JSOC, but you look at Delta's first operation, Eagle Claw.
Yeah.
Which, they were devastated, but it was a watershed moment in special operations history from which we still use standard operating procedures that were derived from that failure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so these no-fail missions, to me, it was not just that, everyone's going to lose their careers, bad things are going to happen,
papers.
But you also we're going to lose dudes.
Yeah.
And that's happened to me before. I didn't want that on my conscience anymore. And so how do I make these decisions? And if something did go wrong, if failure did happen, because failure does happen, right? If failure did happen, could I honestly look myself in the mirror and say, I made the best decision that I could given the information at the time? And so having essentially an algorithm of 4 points that I could just run through my head and be like, okay, am I doing this? Yes. Am I doing this? Okay. Made it so much easier for me to do that. But then I started teaching that to my team. I teach that to my team, here at Deliver Fund. I taught that to my team at, my software company. And it makes it a lot easier. And now I even started using it with my family. How do I raise a son? How do I raise a daughter? How do I be the best husband I can be, to my wife? How do I be the best citizen I can be to my community? And it's really helped me kind of get out of my head, because I can be an overthinker, and actually just start saying, okay, am I doing these things that I'm supposed to do? But by doing that, it allows me to just hand off responsibility, which then allows all of my people to rise up, which makes me increasingly irrelevant.
So the moment that sort of brought you into the human trafficking industry, I'm assuming that happened when you were with the agency.
Yes. Yeah. It's a long story over about 7 years, but the keystone moment was when I was at the CIA. Yes.
And we can't talk about that moment, but
we can talk. We just can't talk about the place.
Yes.
But essentially, I'm in
a place.
I'm in a place. I'm in a stand. We had smoking gun intel on a human trafficker, and realized that there was no place to put that intel, right? You get narcotics intel that's associated with, say, the United States of America, that goes to the DEA, right? You get weapons proliferation intel that, for nukes or whatever, it goes to the Department of Energy. I mean, there's places for everything to go. There's desks for everything to go, and there was no human trafficking desk. And I was actually with a TFO officer at the time, and it was his case, and my team was supporting his operation. And between the two of us, between his high side and the agency high side, and station and headquarters at assets, we could not find a place to put human trafficking intel. And so I ask this of every special operator, right? I mean, so here you were, an officer, so at one of the most specialized military units in the world. Did you ever have a target package on a human trafficker?
No.
Do you know anybody who ever has? Where the purpose of them being on a target was to go after a human trafficker?
Not that I can recall.
You won't find one.
Yeah.
And so I started asking around the agency. The cool thing about the agency and my teams was we were kind of one of the groups of cool guys. So I could just go to doors and knock, and they'd be like, oh, you want to see what we do? And I started reaching out to all the people that I knew, and eventually found that there was under the Bush administration, George W. Bush, in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, which, there's, so that a lot of people know, there's not just one Undersecretary of Defense. There's I don't even know, probably hundreds.
Yep.
One of the offices of the Undersecretary of Defense, there was a human trafficking and human exploitation, essentially, analysis desk. And it was manned by an analyst from the CIA. And so I got in touch with her, talked to her about it. She said it was the best and most important work she'd ever done. The desk got shut down for lack of funding. She got put in CTC, and that was the end of it. And so she really helped me understand that nobody really had the ball on this issue, right? There was a ball in the field. There were lots of cheerleaders. There were, the teams running around doing all kinds of things, but nobody was moving that human trafficking ball into the end zone. And so I just decided that had all the networks, knew what to do, knew how to put it together. If you look at human trafficking academically, it's an illicit commodity that's being sold on a black market. Well, that's something we understand extremely well after the War on Terror. So why don't we apply those same technologies and methodologies to the fight against human trafficking? And most of what I did at the agency was working with indigenous forces. Well, if I can work with a bunch of Libyans who don't like me, I don't particularly care for them. We have almost no values in common. We don't even speak the same language. And I can work with them and we can turn them into a formidable force. How much more successful could we be if our indigenous force was U.S. law enforcement officers? So we set out to equip, train, and advise law enforcement. Very quickly realized that law enforcement does not need help kicking doors or any of this stuff. And it really irritates me when our soft brethren create these nonprofits and they in their arrogance say, I'm going to go help law enforcement kick doors. And like, man, when you shot people overseas, you didn't have to fill out paperwork. You weren't facing murder charges most of the time. These law enforcement officers are essentially guilty until proven innocent every single time they take a kinetic action against somebody. Their family's financial livelihood is on the line. I mean, it's a brutal job. So you don't know their rules of engagement and what it is that they're supposed to do. Take a step back and actually help them with real problems as opposed to thinking that you know what the problems are. And so even though, I mean, I don't know as much about kicking doors as, you know, some tier 1 operators, but I've got a time or two under my belt.
I was there, neither do I. So
yeah,
it's okay.
So
okay.
that's not what we help law enforcement officers do. We're data nerds. We have, I mean, we probably
it's the hardest piece.
Yeah,
and quite frankly, if you did your job right over there during the global war on terror with your proxy force, it was half the battle, or actually 90% of the battle. If it's that building right there, go.
90% of the battle was keeping them off of heroin.
Oh yeah,
but the other, yes.
That aside, it was the can you find and fix?
Yeah.
In the finish, it doesn't have to be pretty. It's things we want to put in an American standard on everything. Soft guys want to put a standard on law enforcement. They're never going to be.
The numbers are too
big. They're good. They're not at the level of soft, but we don't need them to be at the soft level.
No,
we're not
in
going
fact,
against.
Didn't we fight wars to keep them from being at the soft level?
Exactly.
Right. So law enforcement doesn't need help, you know, doing surveillance and all. I get these like Hollywood guys and sports stars who were involved with the organization in the early days, and they'd be like, "Oh, when are we going to go on surveillance?" I'm like, "Man, you're just trying to scratch an action guy itch because you never did anything, and now you're trying to actually make up for that. Like that is arrogant. Stop it. Help the law enforcement officer with what they actually need help with, which is knowing what door to kick. Like learn to write some code, learn to run a computer." And what that has turned into is not only direct support analysis, which our analysts actually embed in law enforcement agencies and help them actually build target packages because they do have a bit of a manpower issue, but it's also resulted in now here we are almost 10 years later, and we've got the largest, cleanest human trafficking database on the planet. And that's what's important because that data never dies. And our AI models get better and better with the more data that's in there. So
you
now,
guys are using Chat GPT. I'm joking.
Yeah,
I'm joking.
Well, it's actually great now that Chat GPT is out because it gives me a proxy to explain AI to people who don't otherwise understand it.
Yes.
So yes,
it's a starting point.
Yes. So large language model, so LLM AI models that are being run on our own compute. So we're not running this stuff in AWS. We work with a company. We actually bought the first micro supercomputer. So we have petaflops of computing power on premises. So because again, our job as leaders is to drive results. That right there saved us about $4,000 a month just in AWS costs on the compute side. But that also means that we can buy that computer for 6 months of AWS costs, and then that is now an asset that can just run in perpetuity that we can turn into doing whatever we want. So we can have it do some mobile identification data one day. We can have it run an LLM the next day. And ultimately, what we're talking about is a signal-to-noise ratio issue. Right? So people can think about it like the airwaves. There's all of this radio frequency communications that are moving through this air right now. Lots of noise, all of it completely irrelevant because it's the wireless signal between that, Apple TV unit and that TV that actually matters to our conversation right now, between these mics, between your computer and this Wi-Fi, right? So it's all dialing in that signal. Well, all the human trafficking, all the data you need to fight human trafficking exists on the open internet. This is not hard stuff to find. People talk about, oh, it's all happening on the dark web, no, it's not. This is the front-facing internet that you could find with your iPhone in the next 3 minutes if you started looking for it using nothing but Google as a starting point. That's the reality of human trafficking in the United States of America. So if we have all of this data, but there's lots of noise, so we have to distill that into a signal that law enforcement can actually use, but we have to do it at scale. We can't do it in a way that causes me to have to go hire a new analyst every single time we get a new law enforcement customer. So we only have a few analysts, yet we are able to work with over 600 law enforcement agencies across the United States simultaneously. Over 600, which seems like a lot, but there's 18,000 jurisdictions in the United States, the major majority of which are state and local. Mm-hmm. So it's connecting all of the state and local assets, one platform, making sure they all have the same data. That was what actually fights human trafficking at scale.
So you started Deliver Fund in 2014, is that right?
I started it in 2012.
One-man operation?
Just one-man operation on my non-deployed time or out of my chew and wherever I was. That's what I worked on when other guys were playing Xbox.
I'm sorry, the Deliver Fund, the meaning behind it?
So the original biblical Greek word for rescue translates as deliver, right? Deliver me from evil actually is rescue me from evil. And then what I realized is that everything that you need to fight human trafficking existed. You just had to fund it. So Deliver Fund.
So, I mean, this is my observation, not being in the industries. It seems like human trafficking is now becoming the hot topic. I understand during the global war on terror, it was not the primary focus.
Right.
But it seems like you have a lot of people jumping on board, which
is awesome.
A good thing.
Which is great.
Awareness.
Mm-hmm.
In
fact, I'll even tell you that we have a lot of people who contact me and say, I want to start a Deliver Fund type organization. And what's cool about the nonprofit community is unfortunately, it can be extremely competitive because people don't understand that money is actually an unlimited resource. So they think they're competing for donors, and they're not. I mean, I left war, and I thought the nonprofit community was going to be all puppy dogs and rainbows. And I didn't realize it was going to be a knife fight in a phone booth.
Yes.
But we actually help other organizations start their own Deliver Fund-like organization because yes, you could build what we built. It would take you 8 years and probably $4.5 million just to get started.
So why don't you start chapters?
So it's not really chapters. What we do is like if you want to start your own Deliver Fund, cool. Well, I will actually walk you through that. And what you do is we give you, once we essentially clear you, right? We do some pretty in-depth investigations into the individuals. But once we know that we can trust them, then they get access to the same technology platforms that we give to law enforcement. So they get access to that data. They don't have to worry about that. Unfortunately, I've learned more about nonprofit law than I ever wanted to know. So I help between myself and my co-founder, Sean, we will help them kind of build their organization. And now they essentially become a fob where they can be out there running and doing their own thing because I can't build relationships with 18,000 law enforcement agencies across the United States, but I can enhance everybody else's ability to do that.
The power of a network.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go with, again, for the listeners and the viewers, in terms of human trafficking 101. I know we traditionally think there's this girl in Russia that is taken captive, shipped to the U.S., and then pushed into the sex trade. A
la the movie Taken,
yes,
but in reverse.
It goes much deeper than that, and there's several forms of human trafficking. Just sort of for a layman, what are the sort of primary sources of what falls under the bucket of human trafficking besides the typical model?
So the way that I like to explain human trafficking in its irreducible minimum is when a person is being either defrauded, forced, or coerced into providing labor for the economic benefit of somebody else. So it's a person who's being forced to do something for somebody else's benefit. somebody else's economic benefit. They don't keep the proceeds of their labor. So one of the biggest confusions is between prostitution and human trafficking, right? Prostitution is real. There are women,
not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, not mutually exclusive, but it's real. There are women and some men who choose for whatever reasons to sell their bodies for the use of other people, but they get to keep the proceeds of their labor, right? They get to keep the money they earn, so to speak. Now, why they do those things, there's people with letters behind their name who can explain all that, right? That's not my fight. Human trafficking is, again, it's a labor or service for somebody else's economic benefit. Oftentimes, that labor or service might be commercial sex in nature, and it appears to be prostitution, but it's not. That person is not willingly there doing that.
Gotcha. So what you're saying with prostitution is it's willing versus sort of the compliant.
One is a choice. One is somebody who's being forced to do something. Because at the end of the day, even if you say, fraud or coercion, it starts in fraud or coercion, but it always ends up in force.
And there's a psychological component to this, to where that person who is forced then becomes a facilitator?
Yeah, they can become a facilitator, what is called a bottom. So traffickers essentially will have a victim who starts to participate in the business of human trafficking in order to get better treatment from the trafficker. After a period of time, that girl essentially becomes the business manager, the COO for the trafficker. And it's a business. And I think part of the things that's made us extremely successful in the fight against human trafficking is I'm an economics nerd. So I look at everything through the lens of, market economics. And so we actually work to disrupt the economic chain, right? The commerce chain of the human trafficking market, as opposed to just go after one human trafficker. So understanding how all of this works, overlaying data on top of it, and then throwing AI models at the data so that they can help you find the signal faster is what makes the whole thing work at scale 24/7, 365.
So this is psychological manipulation, almost along the lines of like Stockholm syndrome.
I think that's the closest proxy. Yeah. I've had a couple of PhD psychologists explain it to me, but I don't understand it well enough to explain it back to you. But yes, I think
that
the closest
was the most honest answer anyone's ever given me.
Yeah, I think I would butcher this.
Yeah,
the closest proxy is Stockholm syndrome type of thing. But think about it this way, because most people, your average human, especially in the United States of America, does not have a proxy for trauma. Most people have not experienced true trauma. If you know women who've been sexually assaulted one time, and they have psychological issues because of that, right? And that's completely understandable. You know women who've been physically assaulted, right, violently, one time, and they have problems from that. You know women who have been emotionally manipulated, right, and emotionally abused, and they have psychological problems with that. Human trafficking victims have all of those things wrapped in to one package, plus a opiate addiction usually thrown on top of that, and the traffickers will purposely get their victims hooked on very high levels of heroin, and it's a business decision for them. And the reason why is because heroin withdrawals are not lethal, but what human trafficking victims have told me is that the pain of a heroin withdrawal is significant.
I've heard.
To the point that when they get dope sick, they will do anything that the trafficker wants them to do in order to get that fix. And it doesn't require the trafficker to abuse the product to make the product less desirable to the customer. They don't have to beat them, even though they do, and they do some terrible things to them, but that's not something they have to do. But there's a more sinister side of the choice for heroin. When the girl gets out of line and the trafficker wants to make an example of her to the other girls, he gives her what they call a hot shot. So we have these trafficking victims that we've worked with and that have been rescued from law enforcement operations who were addicted to extreme amounts of heroin, but didn't know how to actually prepare the heroin or even shoot themselves up, because the trafficker or the trafficker's business manager, the bottom, would always do that and kept them reliant. Mm-hmm. Well, now the trafficker wants to make an example of her, wants to kill her, so he gives her a hot shot, kills her by ODing her on heroin. Law enforcement gets into the hotel room because somebody calls in a bad smell, and they see what sure looks like a hooker with a heroin needle in her arm. Oh, just another dead heroin whore. Case closed. Trafficker doesn't get investigated for the murder. So understanding those types of sinister decisions that the trafficker is making and that is a business decision. Call it, it's sinister, it is evil, it is disgusting, but it is a business decision. When you start to look at it through that lens, you can start to understand, okay, now that we understand this, we know how to counter it, we know how to fight it, we know what to look for to help law enforcement be able to essentially find that signal and do their job better, faster, and cheaper.
And human trafficking extends to just manual labor as well.
It extends to manual labor. It extends to organ harvesting, even though there's a lot of conspiracy theories around that. We saw some, we were working with the Ukrainians before the war, and we saw some pretty nasty organ harvesting stuff happening. If you're a Russian oligarch and you've got a child with a bad heart and you need a genetically compatible heart transplant, maybe you give your biomaterials to somebody in Ukraine who then grows a baby. But that's not the predominance of our fight. I think it's extremely important for everybody to understand, especially fathers and mothers, to understand that, like the conspiracy theories around things like adrenochrome and things like that, like they're not real. They're not real. Adrenochrome, you can buy it online for it's like $11 a milligram, right? It's just, it's not real. What is real is the human trafficker contacting your daughter, who's 12 years old, on TikTok and manipulating her while she is under your roof. That is the reality of human trafficking in the United States of America, not somebody grabbing your kid so that they can drink their blood. Like that's not real. The trafficking that happens in the United States of America is predominantly happening from the top of the sales funnel for the human trafficker. That sales funnel happens on social media just like it does on everybody else.
That's the number one funnel.
Number one funnel is social media accounts.
That's
and
scary.
It's all the big names. And and this is not to demonize these social media companies. Like, we work with one of the biggest ones in the world. They are trying their best. They just have a scale issue. And they are not incentivized to put the same level of resourcing behind that issue as they are, say, money laundering, where we actually have some regulations on what they have to do around payment systems. So our goal for DeliverFund is to enhance the system's ability to work. It's not to replace the system. It's to help industry do a better job of denying their payment platform, their social media platform, their transportation platform to human traffickers.
Hit them where it hurts.
Right. Creating as much market friction as we can. And the human traffickers who figure out how to navigate that market friction, well, we're there to help law enforcement be able to arrest them, and then help prosecutors be able to put together a good case and help juries understand what was really happening. And that is a slow process that happens over a generation, but it's working. It's working extremely well. And thanks to the people who donate their hard-earned money to DeliverFund, we're able to do it at a significant scale. And that's the biggest problem that law enforcement has in the fight against human trafficking. If we could make every human trafficker glow green right now, there's not enough law enforcement officers to actually be able to do anything about much of it. So we've got to enhance the system, and the few law enforcement officers that are doing incredibly heroic and good work, we've got to enhance their ability to close cases better, faster, and cheaper, just like we do with anything else in industry.
Law enforcement is often the butt or the focus of a lot of criticism, and they're not resourced.
They are. And I'll tell you, you look at what a street detective does, and you look at what a intelligence officer in, pick your intelligence agency does on the street. You look at what I was doing. I had the world at my fingertips. Mm-hmm. I mean, a couple $1 million wasn't even like, I didn't need permission for that.
It's a rounding error.
Yeah. Law enforcement officer, street detective, he's paying $20 out of his own pocket for information from some junkie on a street corner. When you look at what law enforcement does, with the lack of resourcing and training they get, it is heroic. It is absolutely amazing. Think about this. As a young PJ, right, which meant that I put the beret on my head, I get to my team, and my first team leader put some humility in me real fast day one. He said, "Congratulations, you have met the bare minimum standard. You now have nowhere, you only have up to go from here." So you get these soft guys who are like, I was a SEAL, and you always know them, or I was a PJ or whatever. Like, they're always like everywhere they go, SEAL tridents on their jacket, and that's it. Oh
God, yeah.
Or the PJ flash is on their jacket, and that's it, right? And they're still talking about the good old days. Well, okay, congratulations, you met the bare minimum standard. I know a SEAL who was in the same period of time as I was, never deployed to combat, not a single time. I know a PJ, multiple PJs actually, who never deployed to combat, not a single time, because the team didn't trust him to do that. All they did was meet the bare minimum standard. So we have to understand that in the process of meeting the bare minimum standard of pararescue, there was more money invested in me in just that process than there is a law enforcement officer through the entirety of a 30 to 40 year career. And then we expect them to be everything from social workers and psychiatrists to door kickers, and they rarely get to focus. So I've really, in doing this work, kind of become very admirable of law enforcement, because when you look at what they do with the lack of resourcing and training that they get, it's nothing short of heroic. And then let's take something even farther. You knew you might die. You might become maimed or something like that, right? But statistically, the chances were low. Think about this. Law enforcement officers who fight child exploitation and human trafficking end up with psychological issues that you and I couldn't even imagine, right? I remember kids' stuff overseas, and it doesn't haunt me, but it
hits you.
It pops up every once in a while in the head. These law enforcement officers are seeing that at scale, in aggregate, and what causes what's called vicarious trauma within the law enforcement community is the aggregate exposure to this stuff. So here's the thing about these law enforcement officers that everybody needs to understand. These law enforcement officers that are fighting child exploitation and human trafficking, they know that they are going to end up with psychological issues, and they choose to do it anyway. Would you make that choice?
That's courage.
That is the absolute definition of courage. And so one of the things that our technology is really focused on is reducing the aggregate exposure to the law enforcement officer, so that instead of having to look at 100 images to find all the clues they need, they have to look at 2. That's saving marriages. That's saving relationships with children. That's keeping law enforcement officers from committing suicide, because they can't turn off the violent imagery that's happening in their brains all the time because of the constant exposure. And so that's another one of our focuses, is to really protect the brain of the law enforcement officers so they can choose to go do this incredibly heroic work and not have deleterious lifetime effects from it.
The word or the phrase that comes out of my mouth when dealing with law enforcement is, "Thank you for protecting my family."
Absolutely.
Bottom line, we go over there for 8 months, 6 months, maybe 4 months, even three-week deployments, but they have it day in and day out.
Well, and also
for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. That's trauma.
And I don't care how much training I have. When I was over there, there's nothing I could do to help my family if something went wrong. A law enforcement officer was standing watch. Yeah. While I was over there doing that stuff. So yeah, the problems we're solving for law enforcement are significant, and it's a second order effect of solving the human trafficking problem, and then illicit commodities writ large, right? Because the black box we're building and the black box we have built will work for many other things than just human trafficking.
It's funny how that works.
Yeah, right.
That's the space race. How much, evolution, science, technology came out of that we utilize. Tang. We got Tang, which is awful. But hey, that's a different discussion. So you could have done this. You could have went the government route and tried to build this capability within the government. But what I've seen a lot, and this is what I love about the soft guys that get out, or even military guys that get out, they're like, I can actually do more outside the system, more efficiently, more effectively, more rapidly than I can within.
I actually could not have built this inside the government, and there's two reasons for that.
Too many barriers to.
There's no bucket of money to fight human trafficking, but let's just say I could get everybody aligned and I could get a bucket of money. I'm not going to be able to compete with Blackbird, and DynCorp, and Boeing, and all the defense industrial complex that's going to take what should have only cost $20 million, and they're going to turn it into a $20 billion project. Like, that is a real problem that our government faces on a day-to-day basis. And so by doing this in the private sector, and part of the reason why I very strategically chose to do this as a nonprofit is because there's no exit. There is no ability for Deliver Fund to be turned to doing something other than its core mission, which is fighting human trafficking. And you know how mission creep, scope creep happens, within the government
regardless
all the
of profession.
time. And then you get some, new presidential election. I was on a covert action platform it was my first job at the CIA. Very, very cool mission. Obama got elected. 3 days later, he rescinded the finding, and that whole package packed up and was out in a week.
Yeah.
So you're at the whims of the politicians. I don't have to worry about that. So there's a lot of freedom that comes from doing that. Now, I think the biggest things that SOF operators and government employees in general deal with is the courage to deal with the unknown of the civilian world. Because once you get in, you don't have to worry about where your paycheck is coming from, where your medical is coming from, right? You really
greatest support system that exists.
You really don't have to be concerned about the day-to-day life. You get to focus on your job. Well, you get out, you have to focus on revenue, which is something you've never had to do before. You might understand a little bit about leadership, but you don't know how to run a P&L. And I don't care if you managed a $400 billion budget. You didn't have to figure out where to get the $400 billion. And so I actually went back to school because I went back to grad school because I just was like, man, I'm out of my depths here, and I got to go get taught some stuff, and I need to do this as fast as possible. Now, I didn't finish my graduate degree because once I felt like I had as much information as I needed, I raised venture capital to start a software company, and it just didn't really make sense to continue. So it was the first thing in my life I ever quit. It was the hardest, easiest decision I ever made.
I went and got my MBA towards the tail end of my career.
Nice.
I was like 38, 39, the oldest guy in the MBA program.
But you made Uncle Sugar pay for it.
I did.
That's super important.
And there's one word that came out of my mouth, like as I was going through the program, was fuck. Like, we were good at what we did.
Yeah.
And now this is a complete and other set of skills that I'm like, okay, this is going to be a rough go. And funny enough, like, you put me in a bad situation on the battlefield. One, there's a comfort when you're surrounded by like chaos. 40, 60, 80 dudes.
Oh, yeah.
That I'm like, actually, I'm in the safest place in the world.
Yeah.
One, I'm an officer, and they have me at the tail end, far from the rounds being flown. But I started to develop anxiety because now I'm worried about where's the paycheck coming. Am I going to hit payroll for my people, which is sort of my biggest thing. I'm like, I don't know why it would be the biggest point of embarrassment for me, because I would feel like I'm letting them down as a leader. That's just merely coming from the military. But, you have to be in the system. And in all, how long were you in government?
17 and a half years.
17 and a half years. You've got to be in there for a while in order to appreciate the private sector and how much better they can solve the nation's problems. I'm a believer in small government. It
Absolutely.
is an industry. We know that a certain side is trying to grow it. Now, organizations like CIA, yes, a lot of funding, a lot of manpower, but there's other things like the VA. A lot of good people in the VA.
Sure.
But privatize healthcare.
Absolutely.
Get rid of this system. Give it to the sector and say, hey, solve this, and you'll be surprised how quickly they do.
Privatize everything in the government that does not restrict somebody of their liberty. So if you have to carry a gun in anger, you should be a government employee. I'm completely against the Blackwaters of the world.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. I just said it. But everything else, your logistics, your supply chain, privatize that, because the agency, the CIA, is the king of using private I mean, they have their own venture capital firm for crying out loud. I mean, they are the kings of using private industry, and kind of always have been, because they've had the latitude to do that. It's not a jobs program. It's a place that accepts 1% of the people that they, that they're interested in. So
I can only imagine the Utah guys sort of laugh at the DI. It was at DIU. It used to be a DIUX. Yeah. Now they're like, oh no, that's pretty cool, guys. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
good job.
AppWorks and SoftWorks and all those things are doing they're doing a great job, and they're trying to work in the right way
within the constraints that they have.
But the difference is the InQtel guys are properly incentivized. They're not on a GS pay scale. They're venture capitalists doing venture capital things, and so the outcome is going to be, and it has already proven to be, significantly better than what you're going to get at the DIU. And look at despite the militaries, and SOCOM and JSOC are trying really hard, but they keep bringing in these civilians and expecting them to mold into government service, and it's oil and water. These folks never last, and they always end up leaving to spend more time with their family or something like that. But it's because the military in general, and I think I'm painting with a broom here, is not a culture of innovation. And in the private sector, it is a culture of innovation
and meritocracy.
Yes.
Let's be honest. Whenever you are a government employee, there are people that will just ride the coattails of others, or, hey, I've got tenure. It's almost like higher education. I've got tenure. I don't need to work hard anymore. That's your job.
Yeah, I have arrived. And the proof of the meritocracy in the commercial sector is undeniable. One of my favorite examples of that is a friend of mine, guy who started a company called Valuetainment, Patrick Bet-David, and Patrick.
I've met him. Yeah.
Yeah. Patrick is an amazing human, and he is not a. I don't know if he's a billionaire. He's probably darn close if he's not already. Yeah. But he's not your typical kind of billionaire, right? You're talking about a guy with no pedigree. Refugee,
Iranian American, right?
Yeah, Iranian American, refugee. Like, was in a refugee camp in Germany. Comes to the U.S., floundering around a little bit. I think fails out of community college. I think he says with a 1.8 GPA, and now
not a lack of capacity or aptitude. It was just a lack of focus. Yeah.
And now has one of the fastest growing media companies in the world.
To include an insurance company, right?
Yeah, had the insurance company, which I think he just took a big exit from.
Good on.
But he's somebody who, I mean, I'm a Harvard grad. I learned more from a dinner with Patrick than I learned going to one of the top Ivy League institutions in the country. Like that right there highlights what the commercial sector is. So getting into the CIA, they love their Ivy League folks, right? They love the right pedigree and all
so
that
the
stuff.
CIA more than
anybody.
But the SEALs had a problem with this.
I think you always have these cycles that happen where they think these are the people we want because we're always trying to find that red door of competence, and then they realize it's not. Patrick never would have even been considered for the agency, right? But because they would be looking at like his academic test scores and stuff. But could you imagine how much impact for good a guy like that could have within government service? And the problem is the government has a 1950s way of thinking about merit, and they're not thinking about it through the lens of the way that everybody else is doing it today. And that's, I think, ultimately, and I think that's irrecoverable. I don't think that that changes.
Actually, Valuetainment, some guys asked me to come out to consider me for a show. So did not have a great meeting with PBD, right?
Oh, with Patrick, okay.
No. And his staff, and particularly one of his guys and I, didn't hit it off. And I still, I highly respect what he's built. I highly respect his drive. What they wanted me to play to the lowest common denominator, the soft community of, like, they started throwing names out in Hollywood, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And
there's better people for that. There's other guys that can do.
Like, I've got a brand. Yeah. And I think you're falling into that Hollywood type, and I'm not, like, controversy. I'm not going to do controversy. Right. I don't need to. But no, that just one interaction, I still respect the guy and what he's doing. It seems like they're
crushing it, and the ability to think down the chessboard. I mean, you can't be a professor and a TikTok star at the same time, right? There are things that are mutually exclusive.
Unless you are, God, who's the
Huberman?
Huberman or why am I
Lex
blanking?
Friedman? Any of
Lex
those
Friedman
guys? Yeah.
And Jordan Peterson. Thank you.
Yeah.
The 3 exceptions to the rule.
A few of those guys have figured it out, right? But by and large, you violate the trust of the audience when you're trying to do too many things at once, right? I think it was Colin Powell who said that a sure sign of mediocrity is trying to please everybody, right?
If you try to sell to everyone, you sell to no one.
Right. So one of the examples I like to use, and I know they can be controversial and some people like them and some people don't, but is Black Rifle Coffee. They purposely alienate probably 70 to 80% of the coffee drinking market. How's that working out for them?
Extremely well.
Extremely well. Right? They are not trying to please everybody.
It's know your base.
Right.
Know your audience extremely well. If you don't know your customer base, then you're basically throwing a dart with a blindfold on.
And so yes, there are the Jordan Petersons. Yes, the Hubermans exist. The Lex Friedmans exist. Assume you're not them. Right? So pick something, get really good at it. One of the things that was actually a detriment to it is both a good and a bad for pararescue is we dig lots of shallow holes. We're really right. There's a few of them that are pretty deep, right? The combat medicine side, I'll put on a target, I'll put a PJ toe to toe with anybody on the planet, right?
Yeah.
But on sick call on a fob, PJ may not be right. If it burns when you pee, they may not be your best guy. Get yourself an 18 Delta, but either the rope rescue side, the halo side, like all those different things. And then PJs will take one of those holes and then choose to dig it deeper. But you can't be an expert at all those things at once. So look at the guys who were, halo track guys like Andy, right? Look at the things that they did in the skydiving community. Yeah.
He's really not that good at skydiving.
No?
I'm joking.
I was going to say, I've seen a
couple
couple
of
videos.
He's
a lot better than I
No, he's good. And he's one of those guys. There was a guy named Derek Benson. He was killed on Extortion 17 alongside 2 PJs.
Yeah.
I had the privilege of meeting Zerby's parents.
Yeah.
And you talk about good Americans that still are like, we're so proud of our son and we love this country.
Yeah.
And I had this thick copper band on it. Was Extortion 17, the date, and I just took it off and I gave it to the father, and he gave me the one he was wearing. But Andy, Derek, there's these certain guys that pick up everything. Like it just seems like
it just happens.
I freaking hate you.
I know,
because it takes me probably 20 attempts. Pistol was the perfect one. We were talking about Roger Sparks, who is a legend in the recon community, now the PJ community. You said he was a sniper, near perfect scores on the long rifle. Gets to pistol. I was the same way.
Yeah.
And now I'm good with pistol. Like to the point where I was, when you go to Shaw's, Mid-South, I was on that whatever board.
Gun sight
every
whatever.
time. Yeah.
But it changes because I think what happens is you have people who are just naturally good at things. I mean, I can think of 100 PJs who I would work really, really hard to beat them on our squadron PT test. Right? They were hungover, hadn't trained in a week, and I was making sure everything was dialed in just so I could beat them when they were barely trying. We can all think of those guys, but work ethic will overcome talent every single time. And having a strategy will overcome talent every single time. So I was preparing myself. I didn't know it was for Deliver Fund, but I knew it was for tech. So I get these guys who I used to serve with reaching out to me, being like, dude, where'd you learn all this computer stuff? I'm like, remember how you were giving me crap for being in my chew reading books when you guys were all playing Xbox?
Yeah.
That's why. How did you get into this school? How did you do this? I'm like, well, remember when you guys were always saying I needed to go, do more family time with the team or whatever, and you'd go out to the bar or whatever, that I was preparing for this. So I am literally a decade ahead of you because I was spending my time in preparation, not in comfort. And I think that is I think that's the deciding factor. And so in many ways, I'm glad that God did not bless me with more talent, because I would have been able to rely on it and I wouldn't have had to learn how to put in the reps to actually get good at something and how to craft a strategy. Because I'm not somebody who could just learn something off the bat, right? I got to craft it. Okay, I want to learn about AI. I actually have to put together my own curriculum to figure out how I'm going to teach myself AI, what courses I'm going to take, because I'm not just going to pick it up off the bookshelf.
I like to say comfort is a disease that attacks learning and growth. But so I suffer from this same thing, and I say suffer is, my wife says, okay, you got to put it down now. You got to stop working. It's Saturday, Sunday. You got to stop working.
Yeah.
And I'll try to sneak off to my office, and she'll come in and bother me until I stop. But what I've seen amongst high performers, and dude, you're leagues ahead of me, is that when you select a ridgeline, I always use the ridgeline analogy. Mm-hmm. What's the next ridgeline? You get to that ridgeline and you find no joy in attaining that goal whatsoever. You look back on the journey and you're like, man, I learned a lot. But immediately you don't even celebrate, or you maybe say, hey, we did it. And then you're like, what's the next ridgeline?
Right.
And for a lot of guys in soft, they're like, hey, dude, just take a moment to celebrate.
Right.
But within any community, and soft is elite, there's still the 1% or the 10%.
Right.
It's so funny when you look at Heraclitus with the quote about 100 people on the battlefield. Have you guys heard this?
Oh yeah.
You're talking a Ionian philosopher, pre-BC, and he talked about 100 people on the battlefield, and he said 10 don't even deserve to be there. 80 are targets. Bless the 9, for they make the battle, but one brings us home.
Right.
He was talking about Power's law or Pareto's principle all the way back then.
Population distribution curves apply to all populations. I don't care. I mean, if there's 4 people in this room, the population distribution curve applies. There's a tail, there's a lead, and there's the middle. And I think what it just depends on what you're putting it to. So are you putting it to work ethic? Are you putting it to strategy? Are you putting it to talent? I know a lot of very hardworking men, because I've primarily worked with men my whole life, right? They have an extreme work ethic, but they have no strategy. So they confuse movement for progress, and they just run in circles. I know lots of very talented people who can't get out of their own way and are extremely unsuccessful despite the buckets of talent that they have, right? And I know lots of people with a very strategic mind who
can't execute.
Yeah, they just can't get anything done. They're always getting the next degree. And I've fallen into that a little bit, right? They're always getting the next degree.
I've fallen into all those buckets at least once or twice.
And so I think the self-reflection of going, okay, where am I failing myself? Because we talk about leadership a lot, and we always think that leadership is sacrificial. And I've done this to my own detriment, and I'm self-corrected. But we always think that leadership is sacrificial. And one of the things Patrick told me, he said, Nick, when you're always using your Legos to help everybody else build their castles, they'll end up with castles, and you end up with no Legos. And so when we are leading, we have to understand that the very first thing that we have to apply our leadership principles to is ourselves. Leadership does not start externally. It starts internally. That's something I never learned in the military.
It's something I learned way too late.
Way too late.
I was in the best physical shape when I left JSOC. I was emotionally and spiritually bereft. So the whole leaders eat last is just, we know that. It's driven into you.
Yeah.
The guys are going to see you do it. Your reputation is based on it. It's people throw servant leadership out there all the time. I'm getting tired of the word. It's almost like transformational leadership. It's just it's a buzzword. But I didn't realize that until late in my career, to the point where I basically suffered executive burnout.
Yeah. Well, what I figured out on servant leadership is that there were precursors to that we were never taught. So the first thing, what's a leader supposed to do? The very first thing is to, establish, cultivate, and maintain a culture of trust. You got to have that first, right? But that also applies with yourself. You have to trust yourself to do the thing that you're supposed to do. Then you have to trust your team and all that, right? Beyond that, you have to maintain standards, discipline, and mission focus. So standards, discipline, and mission focus apply to yourself. What is your standard? Have you written it down? What is your discipline to that standard? What is your mission, and are you solely focused on that? So when my mission was GWAT. My mission was be a good operator. My mission was fight against human trafficking. What about these 2 little kids and my wife? No, that's my mission. Everything else is secondary, right? What about my relationship to God? That is my mission. Everything else is secondary. So it changes. Then you've got to manage talent and egos. Well, talent and ego applies to yourself as well. You have talent and you have ego, and if you think you don't have ego, then you probably have the biggest ego of all. So how are you managing that? Is it a personal ego or is it a collective ego, right? The people within Deliver Fund's a great example. Incredibly egotistical collectively. They will go to war for the organization and for the mission, but not personally.
Both a strength
right?
and a potential weakness.
And only after you've established trust, right? Discipline, mission focus, standards, manage talent and ego, only then can you serve. Because what happens if you haven't done those things first and you're a servant leader, well, we have another analogy for that. It's called being a doormat. And that's, I've gotten myself into some trouble and kind of had to figure out, how do I make decisions in a way, hold myself accountable, hold my family accountable, hold my team accountable. And if I do those things and I do them in that order, then I can serve. Now it comes most important. What is, and as a medic, you learn that a lot of the things that you do and a lot of procedures you do are not actually correcting problems. They're diagnostic in nature. Mm-hmm. I stick a needle in your chest because I think you have a tension pneumothorax. I don't get any pressure relieved. You don't have a tension pneumothorax, most likely, right? Unless the needle's plugged. So if I'm doing these things and I'm not getting the results I want, well, now I have an algorithm that I can run in reverse to figure out where I'm making a mistake. Am I not properly serving and resourcing my team? Am I not properly managing talent and egos? I don't have the right butts in the right seat on the right bus. Did I not establish a standard, maintain a discipline to that standard, and focus on the mission? Does my team not trust me? Do I not trust them? So you can constantly go through this cycle, and I think by having principles that you focus on that are the irreducible minimum that apply to all aspects of your life, you can keep yourself out of that executive burnout, because you can say, wait a minute, a great example, I'm in combat leading a team. My second deployment as a staff officer at the CIA was going through an absolutely horrific divorce.
Been there.
Nobody on my team knew it. Nobody on my team had any clue. That is the wrong answer. Somebody on my team should have known, so they could be watching my back to make sure that I didn't just get off of a sat phone call with a divorce attorney, get some really bad news, and then turn around and go out on a combat operation and possibly make a bad decision because it was emotionally charged from the call. So I was not properly holding myself to my standard and my discipline, because I told everybody on my team, you got something personal going on, let me know about it.
I want to be there for you. Let's figure this out.
Yeah, so I can help you, right?
How often we put something out and then don't follow that piece of advice.
Right.
It's pure stubbornness, and if I do acknowledge that, that's weakness. That's the traditional sort of train of thought.
But I would actually say it's weakness to not acknowledge it.
And my burnout was right when my divorce happened, right at my 17-year mark, as I was going on my last 2 combat deployments.
Yeah.
As we sort of close this out, one, really 2 questions. So Jim, I always mess up his last name, Cavill, with the new movie coming out. Sound of Freedom. So I'm sure there's some benefits to that, some pros that It's going to create more awareness.
Absolutely.
I'm sure the Hollywood effect will create some probably misnomers. It seems like he's making a lot of noise with this. Mm-hmm. One, he's financially backed it. He's raised a lot of money. Mm-hmm. What are the potential effects you see from this movie coming out?
Both good and bad. I don't know any of the people involved. I don't really have a dog in the fight. We work with law enforcement all over the United States. I've never worked with law enforcement who also worked with that organization. So I can't really speak to the movie itself, right? I'm very happy that we're talking more about this human trafficking issue. And it's not just child trafficking, it's human trafficking. But let's face it, if we're going to prioritize our time and efforts, we should probably prioritize it on the children. So I'm very happy about all that. My concern is and I'm going to use the word conspiracy theories, which I think is overly used these days. It seems like when somebody finds something they don't agree with, they just immediately call it a conspiracy theory. But there's some conspiracy theories that, and this is very important for parents. So if you're a parent listening to this, listen up. There's not a white van with free candy painted on the side that's coming through your neighborhood to steal your children. Do abductions happen? Yes, but they're relatively rare. They are, as much as you may not like her, Hillary Clinton is not drinking the blood of children in her basement. Like, that's not real. Are there tribes in Africa and other places in the country or other places in the world that do some really nasty stuff around human rituals and sacrifice and all that? Yes, but those are exceptions to human trafficking. There's this conspiracy theory around this chemical called adrenochrome, which is basically just what happens to adrenaline when it oxidizes. It's a very simple chemical process that I've literally heard people say that it's 10 times more powerful than heroin, and it makes you look younger. None of that is true, and the math proves it. Right? The thing about chemistry is it's math, and mathematically, like, that just doesn't work. You can buy adrenochrome online. It's like $11 to $20 a milligram. It doesn't really have a lot of value outside of research. So those are all conspiracy theories, and they're just not true. And the problem I have with that is that it distracts the public from the reality. And the reality of human trafficking in America is not that somebody's going to come take your child so they can drink their blood. The reality of human trafficking in America is a human trafficker is trying to get your 14-year-old daughter to send him a nude picture so that he can extort her, and he's doing that over a social media platform that she's doing under your roof. So parents have locks on their doors. I got a Malinois. You want to come into my house? Bring it. I'm not even going to need to get a gun because my dog's going to rip your throat out. So my dog is.
We've
not,
got a Dutch Shepherd.
Okay, yeah. My dog does
my
not.
wife loves it. Yeah,
the dog loves my wife way more than it does me. But we have all these like physical measures to protect our children, when the biggest threat to our children is that device that you gave them when they are in their room and your Wi-Fi router. So you are better off not having a Wi-Fi router in your house if you want to protect your children than you are having locks on your doors. That is the important thing for parents to understand. Almost all, and I usually hesitate to use the word all, but almost all human trafficking cases in the United States of America originate online. The victim was contacted online. Every once in a while, it's the runaway at the bus station or something like that. But for the most part, it is online. And that's the thing that parents need to understand. And one of the things that we have available right now, it's in beta, so please be kind to us. But people can go to the App Store right now, and they can just search Deliver Fund or Human Trafficking Safeguard, and they can actually download an app that gives them access to a subset of our data. And that data is the Human Trafficking Watch List, which was created by Deliver Fund, and we own that. And it's also it gives access into billions of data points that are associated with human trafficking. So if your phone number is in our database and pops positive on that app, you've got some explaining to do.
Or if your son's.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or email address, or the coach's name, the soccer coach's name, or something like that. So one of the things we have done at Deliver Fund over the last 18 months is moved from just helping law enforcement fight human trafficking to helping everybody fight human trafficking. Now, we do charge for that app because it's not free, but all of those resources is $1.99 a month. So all of those resources go into keeping the computers spinning, keeping the engineers fed so they can keep their fingers on the keyboard and actually build these technologies. And we'll have more and more data coming into that app over time. But imagine this. Imagine if now every single parent, before they do anything with anybody, right? 16-year-old girl has a new friend that she met at high school, run our phone number through our app. If it pops positive on a commercial sex traffic, on a commercial sex advertisement, high probability that 16-year-old girl is actually recruiting your daughter. The soccer coach's name pops
without
positive.
knowing what she's doing.
Yeah. The soccer coach's name pops positive on the human trafficking watch list for a human trafficking associated crime. Probably better tell somebody about that. The reason why human trafficking has proliferated in the United States of America is for two reasons. One is the internet. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children found that there was an 846% increase in suspected child trafficking cases over a 5-year period. When you overlay the data of what happened, it was the introduction of the iPhone and the Facebook app. And it has only continued to go up from there. So human traffickers are contacting your children on the internet. That is happening. It's a sales funnel to them. It's a numbers game. And we'll give you a link that you can put in the show notes to a quick little reel that explains that. The other thing that's happening is a complete lack of sunshine. If somebody gets arrested for a human trafficking related crime, and I say human trafficking related because a lot of local jurisdictions, the laws are real old, so they don't have a law called human trafficking. They call it pimping and pandering or aggravated prostitution or something like that, but it's human trafficking under the federal definition. Somebody gets arrested for one of those crimes, there's no transparency into that. So
they're not a sexual offender.
Nope.
They're not on that list.
Nope, they're not on that list. So we are creating, sunshine is the best disinfectant.
Yes.
So we are making it so that everybody can be everybody in U.S. society can be a ray of sunshine and help fight this problem.
How involved are you in shaping the policy for the country? Are you in those discussions, or is that just a route you don't really want to go?
I am in those discussions, but intimately, but very much very much behind the scenes. I don't want anybody knowing which politicians I'm talking to, because that becomes a point of attack. And we have gotten attacked. There's a company called Pornhub. Yes, I know you're listening, Pornhub. There's a company called Pornhub who actually spent money hiring a PR firm to go after us because I was pointing out that human trafficking is happening on Pornhub. They don't like that. They don't like the sunshine. And so we're helping everybody become a ray of sunshine. So if anybody wants to get involved in the fight against human trafficking, but they're full-time jobs, soccer moms and dads, and got to take the kid to jiu-jitsu and the daughter to ballet and all these different things, everybody can get involved by just going to the App Store, downloading the app, paying their $1.99 a month, and having access to that data. And they may not use it for 4 or 5, 6 months, a year, but when they need it, it's there. It's very similar to when we run a background check for employment. Mm-hmm. We don't expect, we background check everybody at Deliverfund. Now, we do it internally because we have the resources to do that. But when you hire somebody and you run them through a background check, it's really a block checking exercise.
Yeah.
You don't expect
they
anything
haven't
to come back positive.
Yeah.
But what happens
they pay their taxes?
What happens when something does come back positive? Right? That it's like, holy smokes, I'm glad I did that.
Yeah.
It's very rare, but the consequences of not doing it are completely deleterious. So that's where we're going as an organization, and we're not only doing that for everybody from the soccer mom, the stay-at-home mom, all the way to industry. So every single industry, banking, payments, transportation, hotels, motels, the gig economy stuff. I don't want to mention any names of companies.
Yeah.
But they're all they're all complicit, but they're not in on it. That's a conspiracy theory. No, you cannot buy children through Wayfair. Like, that's not real. But what you can't, right? But
I've not heard that one.
Oh yeah, it's a crazy conspiracy theory. But you can find human trafficking victims in the hotel chain, in the 4-star hotel that you're staying at when you're on business travel, because the customers don't like to go to the Motel 6. They don't want to go to the cheap motel. They want to be at the high-end hotel, and that's where they feel comfortable. So that's where the traffickers bring the girls. We have a trafficker we've been working on for quite a while who lives in penthouse suites in 5-star hotels. He is private jet rich. He's got his own jet, I guarantee you his pilot does not know where he's getting all of his money. He takes his girls to some of the ritziest jewelry stores in a major metropolitan area in Texas. And I guarantee you that jeweler does not know that that trafficker is rewarding his girls with some jewelry for good behavior. He's also using their jewelry to launder his money.
Yes. Yep.
So what that jewelry store owner can do, what that hotel manager can do, is just integrate our data so
Deny
that
access.
Yeah, so that they can say, "Oh, sorry, we don't do business with your kind." Maybe they report it to law enforcement. Maybe they don't. It doesn't matter. You're just denying territory to the traffickers, and that's where we're working, and that's why we think that once we finish and complete our technologies and roll them out to all the places they need to be rolled out, the math shows that we'll have over 80% reduction in online commercial sex trafficking in the United States within a 7-year period. That's impact. Can't do that in the government.
No, you can't. No, you can't, sir. So for the listeners, parents, go get the app. Have a hard conversation with your children, which is a hard conversation because you don't want to admit that evil exists.
And we have all the resources to have those conversations on the Deliver Fund YouTube page. You literally can just have your children watch YouTube videos.
So we'll put the links to that in the article. Right now, for the listener who wants to get involved or help, is money the best way? If it is, that is...
Absolutely. If you're in industry and you need data to eliminate human traffickers from your platform, whatever that might be, we have the ability to make that very quick and easy for you to do. If you are the average citizen, download the app, use it, run everybody you can think of's phone number through it, and eventually, pretty soon, you'll actually have the ability to, if you get a positive hit, to report that back to us, should you choose to. If you're law enforcement, reach out and get training and data and software. It's free to you. All you got to do is hit us up with your official email address. Please don't hit us up with your burner Gmail address, because we will authenticate that you're actually law enforcement. But hit us up, get the data, get the training, get what you need to do your job better, faster, and cheaper. And if you're a individual or a corporation with a philanthropic heart, and you doesn't have to be $500,000 donations. It can literally be $5 a month. So $5 is roughly what it costs us to de-anonymize a burner phone. $5. So give up a cup of coffee for Deliver Fund every month, and you can actually help pay what it costs us technologically to figure out that this burner phone is associated with this person over here. It's that cheap. And for people with donor-advised funds, philanthropic foundations and things, we are completely privately funded. We're platinum rated on GuideStar. We have the highest rating Giving in Excellence has ever given.
Good.
We are a completely transparent organization, and we're a really good use of philanthropic dollars.
Okay, so I think that's the call to action. Sign up for $5 per month, $60.
No, it's $18 a year or $1.99 a month for the app.
What I'm saying is, for the listeners, my call to action is recurring donation, $5 a month, $60 annually. If we can get, even if we can get 100 people to do that, that's 100 phones.
That's
as
significant.
You said, demonetized. You make me feel selfish now, like I'm not doing enough, man. So thank you for that. It's always good to feel small and reassess your priorities. But
that's kind.
Nic, exceptional background. Thank you for serving the country, and the fact that you are a living example that service extends beyond the uniform. And
Absolutely,
you've done that in multiple ways. So I think for the listeners, we're all trying to drive impact, find something that's actually going to impact the community around you. It doesn't have to be nationally. It doesn't have to be globally. It's amazing what one person can do if they affect 3 people.
Absolutely.
Thank you, brother. And
Hey,
keep up the good fight. All right. We'll see you guys next time.